and stuff like that. I have to get to a council meeting, so thanks so much. You have time in there for questions. Thank you.
Are we going to be becoming a 50-minute city just like Edmonton?
One of the things we heard today from a number of the presenters was a preamble, basically a doom and gloom type of scenario. In fact, we just heard a presentation that cited the absolute worst case scenario. You would have to burn all the fossil fuels of the planet practically to get to that. And of course there would be possibly climate repercussions, but that is not a realistic proposition. Climate models are not performing well relative to what we actually measure and observe in nature.
My colleague Sid Fizzard and I are at Mount Royal's campus here in Calgary, where the mayor of the city, Jyoti Gondek, made an appearance at a sustainability forum to give opening remarks and answer a few questions. Now, I'm not sure if there was any discussion about both Sid's and I appearance, but when asked by the MC if there were any questions in the audience, I was quick to raise my hand up, and the MC of the event pretended not to see my hand and continued to ask if there were any hands up or any questions until somebody in the audience actually pointed out that I had my hand up and she had no choice but to take my question.
How do we stress the fact that the impacts of climate change are not some sort of distant threat, that they are real and present dangers, and they affect our community, our economy, and our way of life. Even though we are doubling down many of our efforts, we are increasing our commitment and our actions around sustainability, but we can't keep pace with the climate change that we are experiencing. So this is a call for us to strengthen our resolve and move even quicker. And as we work towards our ambitious goal towards becoming a net zero and climate resilient city by 2050, we need to confront the urgent realities that we face today. And I'm particularly proud of the fact that even with our city experiencing a 45% population increase since 2005, our GHG emissions have actually gone down.
Any questions for the mayor? This is a great chance. I'd love to hear if the students have any questions right off the bat. Yes, I know, so much pressure.
If you have a question here.
Okay.
How do you make sure sustainable development efforts don't hinder economic growth or reduce job opportunities, particularly in sectors like manufacturing and energy production?
So the question is, how do we make sure that we're not limiting economic growth and that we're not actually hampering job opportunities by practicing sustainability? And it's an excellent question. And that's why when you look at sustainability, it has to be economic, environmental, and social. The one thing that we want to make sure we are not doing is leaving people behind because they don't have means. So I would say if we're looking at the holistic picture, and we take Prairie Economic Gateway as the example, this is the rail served industrial hub that I was talking about, that is going to generate well-paying jobs for people. And so that's top of mind for me and for many of you. It's also strengthening our position as an inland port, like I mentioned. And at the same time, it's cutting down emissions. So it's looking at things holistically and understanding how we can achieve these things at the same time that becomes really important to sustainability. It's the same thing when I talked about the hailstorm. There's a lot of people in North Calgary that are having trouble getting their insurance claims processed. They're going to have trouble finding the supplies and the suppliers to do the damage repairs on their homes. And that is not a great position for them to be in. There's folks that didn't have insurance. So when we see the impacts of things like climate change, when we see weather events, and we see the toll that they take on the people that are most impacted, we have to make sure that we are looking at sustainability from every angle. So I appreciate your question.
Hey, Mayor Gondek. What kind of economic, what kind of financing will it take from the city to procure some of these initiatives?
It's a good question about what kind of financing will it take from the city. There's a giant myth out there that I think I need to bust, and I'm sure most of you understand that this is the spread of misinformation. There is this idea that we have dedicated $87 billion towards our sustainability and environment plans. That's not the thing. I believe the report indicated that to be fully net zero and zero emissions and fully sustainable, it might take an investment of $87 billion. So to be clear, I don't have an $87 billion budget for this somewhere. Rather, we are making investments over time in our 4-year budgets to ensure that we can do things like make our buildings more energy efficient as a city, that we are taking steps to make sure that our waste and recycling facilities are able to use waste heat to turn it into power generation. So those are the kinds of steps that we're taking, and the budget incrementally goes up every year if there's room for that. But again, we've got a budget cycle coming up in November, and we will see how much room we have for climate initiatives versus all of the other services that we have to provide. It is a balancing act, but we're committed to doing everything we can. And for individual homeowners, the Clean Energy Improvement Program is something that we've implemented. You can access it to get the upfront cash to do things like better windows, solar panels, a better furnace, and then you pay back the loan, so to speak, through your property taxes. So we're focused on ourselves as a corporation, but we're also very much focused on all of you as individuals.
All right, I think that's all we have time for. I just want to thank you. We're so grateful for your time and for all you're doing at the city to promote sustainability, and we really, really appreciate you deciding our day because it's a powerful message, and thank you very much.
Sid and I were both able to get in a question each, and I did have one remaining important one that I wanted to ask the mayor, so I decided to catch her outside the library and get a response. She began walking much faster, quite frankly, running down the stairs, and, well, I guess, take a look.
How can we make sure that these sustainable policies are going to interfere with property rights, especially with stuff that the mayor is coming in? It's never my goal to take away people's rights. It's my goal to make sure that people maintain their rights. So we do good things for property rights. So property rights will be cycle, is that correct? Will you be changing property rights? And stuff like that. I have to get to a council meeting, so thanks so much. You had time in there for questions. Thank you.
Are we going to be becoming a 50-minute city just like Edmonton? Do you have plans for 50-minute cities for Calgary? Well, based on her response, it does seem like she's got no interest, allegedly, to trample on anybody's property rights. And I also did ask her about the 50-minute cities, and we did not get a response on whether or not we were going to become a 50-minute city just like the city of Edmonton. But just like for property rights, only time will tell. We decided to stick around and watch a couple more presentations, one of which was Caitlin Chandler from the city of Calgary. She discussed Calgary's proactive plans for a better climate future.
My name is Caitlin Chandler, and I'm going to be co-presenting today with my colleague Morgan Rice here, and we're both on the climate adaptation team in the Climate and Environment Department at the City of Calgary. Global climate change is causing a shift in our local climate, and this poses significant risk to the City of Calgary and to all Calgarians. The scenario that we use in our climate projections is called RCP 8.5, and it assumes a future where we continue to experience very high levels of greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore a world facing strong climate change. We use this scenario in our climate projections because despite commitments and efforts being made around the globe to get climate change under control, we're still on track for this high emissions scenario. So it's the best scenario to use for planning purposes and risk assessments. Our projections show that by the 2050s, what we call a short duration precipitation event might have about 28% more water volume, and we're likely to experience more of these heavy rain events. Counterintuitively, as the risk of flood events increase, so too does the risk of drought. And this is because although our annual precipitation overall is increasing, it's not a steady increase. We'll see longer dry periods between heavy storms, and we'll see higher rates of evapotranspiration in the summer, and we'll see less stream flow in the late summer months. Some impacts of drought, like the watering restrictions that we saw last year in 2023, which were direct caused by the drought conditions, are more obvious. Others are harder to see, but still leave profound and lasting effects. So, for example, drought reduces the water available to provide for Calgary's core infrastructure and services. So things like water treatment, firefighting, irrigation, industry, and recreation. Left unchecked, these impacts of climate change will stretch government and municipal resources, disrupt businesses, pressure supply chains, displace populations, damage our natural ecosystems, and more. It's really important to note it will exacerbate inequalities. As probably everyone in this room recognizes, the impacts of climate change are not felt equally among communities. marginalized communities bear the brunt of climate change. These communities often face systemic inequalities that intensify the effects of climate change, from inadequate access to resources to disproportionate exposure to extreme weather events. A study done in 2022 for Calgary tried to quantify the cost if we don't adapt to climate change now. It showed that the total annual social costs from climate-related impacts for Calgary, including impacts on infrastructure, the natural environment, economy, and healthcare, are estimated to reach about $2.6 billion and $7.8 billion in any given year in the 2050s and 2080s, respectively. That said, we also know that proactive adaptation can dramatically decrease the cost of climate change.
Our City Council declared a climate emergency back in 2021. So this means that addressing and incorporating climate change is a priority across the municipality, as we heard from the Mayor this morning, when developing our city strategies, business plans, and budgets. So since then, we have developed an updated long-term climate strategy for the city to guide us, a short-term strategy implementation plan, and as well as biannual climate progress update reports. So the climate strategy is a long-term plan for Calgary that maps out what we need to do by 2050 to achieve our climate-related goals of being net zero and climate resilient city. So these long-term goals set the direction for our work in emissions reduction, for how we need to evolve to better withstand the impacts of climate change that Caitlin just mentioned, and for how we can build capacity so that everyone is able to join us in our climate journey.
Hi, I just had a question. Nice to meet you. Yeah. Do you know how Edmonton is like implementing the whole 50-minute cities thing?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, is Calgary headed in the same direction?
That's a good question. I am not part of the I'm not part of the planning team.
Okay.
I think that certain elements from that are certainly being kind of considered.
Okay.
But I can't say for sure whether that is whether they're kind of naming it that as their
I know with the water restrictions we just had, they weren't in relation to drought. They were in relation to the water main that broke. But do you think it would be useful for us to kind of keep pushing those restrictions regardless of whether or not we're in a drought, because we're going to get to that point?
Certainly, yeah. I think, it was 2.5 years ago maybe that our new sort of watering restrictions guide was produced essentially, and then shortly thereafter we experienced the 2023 drought and actually had to implement those restrictions at different stages. And so I think that that's probably those different stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 type restrictions is probably something that we will see more and more often. And
I was going to say, I think it's more like the behavior, right? So a lot of people probably realize I actually don't need to use that much water.
Exactly.
A lot of people bought rain barrels. So now maybe our water use is going to continue to change. We're going to probably see a little bit of a difference as these restrictions are kind of more top of mind and have been kind of continuously happening.
One individual by the name of Paul Johnston is a professor here at Mount Royal in the Earth and Environmental Sciences. He brought up a very interesting question, which prompted us to later pull him out and actually talk to him one-on-one. So here's a look at that.
Much of what you presented was dependent on the AR 8.5 computer model for your projections to 2080. That's been, I think, completely discredited now. That I saw one report that if you burned all the fossil fuels on the planet, you could not achieve the 8.5 scenario.
Climate models are not performing well relative to what we actually measure and observe in nature. And so what we have is a situation, I'm going to call it noble lies, that we all want a better planet and so on, and I think there are some that are attracted to what I would consider to be exaggerated claims that are not founded in science to advance what they see as something valuable to the planet as a whole and the people that live on it. But the problem with that is that if you exaggerate what science is actually saying, you diminish your message. You lose credibility, and the public becomes jaded because they realize that there are sensationalist headlines that are not supported by science. So I see that approach as being quite damaging. Let's look at what is and do something about that.
If you are disappointed with Mayor Gondek's performance, make sure to head to firegondek.com and sign the petition. As always, stay strong and stay free. For Rebel News, I'm Angelica Toy. If you say no to the net zero agenda, make sure to head to nogreenreset.com and sign the petition.